Joining the conversation we have senior writer for The Dispatch, David Drucker, and chief White House correspondent for The New York Times, Peter Baker. Peter, your latest analysis for The New York Times is entitled, "In Trump's Alternate Reality, Lies and Distortions Drive Change." And in it, you write in part this: in the first months since he returned to power, he has demonstrated once again a brazen willingness to advance distortions, conspiracy theories, and outright lies to justify major policy decisions. Mr. Trump has long been unfettered by truth when it comes to boasting about his record and tearing down his enemies. But what we're dubbed alternative facts in his first term have quickly become a whole alternative reality in his second, to lay the groundwork for radical change as he moves to aggressively reshape America and the world. Taking his real estate hucksterism and reality show storytelling into politics, Mr. Trump has for years succeeded in selling his version of events. The world, according to Mr. Trump, is one where he is a master of every challenge, and any failure is someone else's fault. Mr. Trump, who repeatedly disparaged media fact-checking during last year's campaign, does not back off after misleading statements and lies are exposed. Instead, he tends to double down, repeating them even after it's been reported that they are not true. In Mr. Trump's facts are fungible world, conspiracy theories at times are given as much weight as tangible evidence, and those who traffic in them are granted access that no other president would give. And Peter, your conclusion ultimately as to where this is all going.
Well, look, obviously it's not much of a headline to say that Trump doesn't always dabble in the truth, right? This is something we've seen now for 9 years on the political stage. But what's really striking, I think, is how much he is deploying misleading statements, distortions, lies to justify policy changes, right? It's not just that he's bragging, which he likes to do. He's the best, he's the biggest, he's the most, he's all these things. What he's doing is he's laying out these alternative realities to say we need to make change. For instance, as we just said, right? It wasn't Russia that started the war, it was Ukraine started the war. Well, if Ukraine started the war, then we don't have to feel nearly as sympathetic toward them, and therefore we can make a deal with Russia that's more tilted toward the Kremlin. If USAID is actually sending $50 million worth of condoms to Hamas, as the president claimed falsely, of course, then maybe we should go ahead and shut down USAID, because who could be so stupid? So these are not just random, falsehoods. These are meant to drive policy changes, and I think that's important to remember.
David, the conversation we've been having this morning about what might possibly curtail Trump's ambitions, and I think Jim was pointed to the right area. It's if Trump loses power, and that would come from losing approval ratings, which might be precipitated by something like a recession or an economic downturn. When you talk to Republicans or you talk to people around Donald Trump, what are the concerns they have? Are there any? I mean, we've heard about these town halls where people are not happy. Now, maybe some of those people are Democrats that have been shipped into the town halls. Maybe some are constituents who are genuinely angry. But what are you hearing around Trump people that they are concerned about, if anything at all?
Well, look, I think what Republicans are concerned about generally is that an axiom of the first term won't be true of the second term, which is Trump blusters a lot for leverage and so-called negotiating power. But at the end of the day, on the big issues that matter, he's going to land more or less where I would land as a normal pre-Trump era Reagan Republican, right? You look at foreign policy. If you look at the first term, Trump's rhetoric vis-a-vis Russia was just as awful as it is now, just not around the war in Ukraine. And yet he levied some of the hardest sanctions on Russia. He shipped lethal aid to Ukraine that President Obama would not ship to Ukraine. He made energy exports that Russia relies on much tougher, which was harder on the Russian economy. And so you talk to Republicans, and their hope is that this is where Trump will end up, despite all the things that he has been saying lately. But I think one of the things we have to remember is that Trump may lose popularity broadly in the country, and we've seen that happen particularly this century after just a few months with a lot of presidents. But his power in Republican primaries, I bet, will remain just as strong as ever, at least through the 2026 midterm elections. So if you're looking for Republicans to break from Trump or challenge Trump, for those running for re-election in red districts, and most districts are red or blue, or in Republican states, or for those wanting to run for Senate or governor in these states, they're not going to want to upset Trump, even if his numbers go down broadly, and so they will stick with him.
So let's now turn to a related piece from New York Times opinion columnist Ross Douthat. It's called "What Trump Can Learn from the Last GOP Disaster." He writes in part this: in the attempted shock and awe of the second Trump administration, you can see ways that the vibe shift of 2025 could be squandered. So it's worth drawing some lessons from the Bush era that might apply to Trump and Elon Musk and other would-be counter-revolutionaries today. The first lesson is not to overread your mandate. Trump-era conservatism has a clear mandate to restrict immigration, fight inflation, and wage war on DEI. It has no obvious mandate for making deep cuts to Medicaid, among other ideas that congressional Republicans are entertaining. This connects to the second lesson. If you change it, you own it. The third lesson: you can't build a new elite without co-opting part of the old elite. So if you want to go to war against an establishment, you need to be clearly wooing some of its members, making it easy for them to join the winning side, even while you're roughing others up. So, David, back to you here. We saw last week at the town hall in Georgia real anger in a Republican district about some of the cuts that Trump and Musk are putting forth. We're seeing some polling that suggests that people are, even Trump supporters, uncomfortable a little bit of what's coming. So as you talk, and you're so well plugged in with members of the GOP, are there any alarm bells starting to go off, like, hey, we might be doing too much too soon? Or do they think, look, the wind's in our back, the voters gave us these victories in November, full speed ahead?
Yeah, listen, I'm going to do a little Fiddler on the Roof on the one hand, on the other hand here. On the one hand, it's hard to find Americans of any political stripe that are going to feel bad for government workers losing their jobs or getting memos saying, explain your job, because most Americans work in the private sector. They've all had bosses that do things like that to them, and their entire life they've had to navigate this. And so, on the one hand, they're going to look at some of the changes that Trump and his allies are trying to effect in Washington, and they're just simply not going to have a lot of sympathy for the idea that you're firing government workers and trying to make government more efficient. On the other hand, I think the Trump administration is missing a political opportunity to better explain and execute what they're doing. Now, maybe voters wouldn't like it, and the way they're doing it could end up backfiring politically over time if the agencies impacted affect people's lives in an adverse way, and then they're going to say, wait a minute, I didn't vote for all of this chaos. I voted for you to fix things, not make it worse. So I think it's a matter of how the Trump administration goes about it. Do they ever explain any of this and make it clear to the American people what the strategy is? If they were to do that, they'd have more political leeway. If they do not and just appear to go about smashing glass, once these things affect voters adversely, that gives Democrats an opening to say, I told you so, and that's when voters might actually listen to what Democrats have to say about all of this.
Yeah, and Peter, it's not just the smashing glass. I mean, the image of Elon Musk with the chain store was striking because it was a kind of wacky image, but because even over the weekend, you do have some Republican senators saying, yeah, we agree with the principle of cutting government. We want, even if it means some people have to lose their jobs, but please can they try and do it more humanely?
Yeah.
And with Elon Musk's approach, and you saw it on Twitter and now you're seeing it replicated here, humanely seems to be almost a bad word, right? Yeah. I mean, the kind of the relish with which he says things like, I'm sending USA to the wood chipper, the sort of cruelty, I guess is the word, is part of it.
It's part of the whole thing. Absolutely. Humane is like diversity.
It's weak.
Right? These are not, these are radioactive words in this administration.
But could that be a problem for
What did Russ Vought say? Russ Vought, who is now the OMB director, the Office of Management and Budget director, had been in the first term, now back in the second term, one of the architects of Project 2025. He said not that long ago that he wanted federal workers to come to the office every day afraid and recognizing that they are the villains. it's you know, look, every president comes in to some extent, you know, unhappy with the bureaucracy, and some of them run against it, right? It's politics. This has gone further than we've ever seen, much further than Reagan, who was anti-government when he came in 1981, much further than most Republicans have gone. What they're saying is that they're not just lazy and inefficient. They're saying they're evil. They're bad people, and they deserve what's happening to them. The chainsaw is what the image is meant to be. Now, is there a backlash to that? Sure. A lot of professionals, including professional Republicans, are you know, aghast at this. This is not the way to run a government. It's not the way to cut spending, by the way. If you really want to make a serious effort at bringing down the deficit, which is a serious issue, $2 trillion a year, this is not the way you would do it. You do something much more thoughtful, much more meaningful. And you'd go after the real big spending items, by the way. These are not the big spending items.
All right, Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, thank you very much for being on this morning. His latest piece is available online right now. And senior writer for the Dispatch, David Drucker, thank you as well.